Welcome dear students. In this video, let us learn about the anatomy of middle ear. It is considered to be a difficult topic in ENT in terms of understanding. But if you understand it once properly and if you get that orientation and idea, you will never forget it, and it's in fact an easy topic actually. So let us study about it. Anatomy of middle ear. Before we proceed any further into the topic, you should understand two terms, middle ear cleft and middle ear. They're sometimes used synonymously, but no, they both are two different terms. Let us see. Middle ear cleft means it is a comprehensive term that is used to include middle ear, eustachian tube, edetus and antrum, mastoid antrum and mastoid air cells. All of these together is called as middle ear cleft. When you say cleft, it includes all of these structures together. They are considered together because they are lined by a common mucous membrane. They are all continuous with each other. So the middle ear is also called as tympanum. Tympanum or middle ear means the same. Okay. So first let us study about middle ear and then we shall look into all the other structures of middle ear cleft. What is middle ear? Middle ear is basically an air-filled cavity. It is an air-filled cavity lined by mucous membrane. It consists of three middle ear ossicles, three bones and two muscles and a few nerves that are passing in between. But basically it is an air-filled cavity that is lined by mucous membrane in the temporal bone. It is the second part of ear. The ear is divided into external ear, middle ear and inner ear. External ear is just a passage that collects the sound and transmits the sound into middle ear. Middle ear has the function of transmitting the vibrations of the tympanic membrane into the inner ear, and in this process it also amplifies the sound. And it also has a protective mechanism to protect the ear from excessively large sounds. These are the two functions of middle ear. It basically does the job of transmitting the vibrations of tympanic membrane to the inner ear. The middle ear communicates with the nasopharynx anteriorly and with the mastoid posteriorly. These are the two communications of the middle ear. I told you the middle ear cleft, that is why we call, because they are all continuous with each other. The eustachian tube, middle ear cavity and the mastoid behind. Okay. So, Next, let us look into the parts of middle ear. The middle ear consists of three parts. First one is the mesotympanum. We know that the middle ear is bound by tympanic membrane on its lateral side. So mesotympanum is that part of the middle ear which lies just opposite to the tympanic membrane. Which part of tympanic membrane? Pars tensa of tympanic membrane. It lies opposite to pars tensa. The second part is called as epitympanum. What is epitympanum? It is also known as attic. The epitympanum is also called as attic. Attic is that part of middle ear that lies above the pars tensa. So what is present above pars tensa? The shrapnel's membrane, pars flaccida, and also some bony attic wall is present. So it is opposite to pars flaccida and bony attic wall. The third part is hypotympanum. The hypotympanum lies below the pars tensa. So the middle ear is divided into three parts: mesotympanum, epitympanum and hypotympanum, mainly in relation to pars tensa. Along with these three, there is another term called as protympanum. What is protympanum? Protympanum is that part of middle ear which surrounds the opening of the eustachian tube. It is not exactly a part of middle ear, but that's a term that you have to understand. It is that part of the middle ear present at the opening of eustachian tube. Next, let us study about the boundaries of middle ear. This is the part that is slightly difficult to understand, so kindly focus and listen to me. The middle ear can be compared to a box that has a roof, a floor, a medial wall, a lateral wall, anterior and posterior walls. It is not exactly a perfect cube. The dimensions vary. It is not equal anteriorly, posteriorly and medially, laterally. The dimensions absolutely vary, but it has these 6 walls, and that is why for easier understanding we assume it to be like a box and we study all the boundaries. So let us study each one of them one by one. First, let us study about the roof of middle ear. The roof of middle ear is also known as tegmentum. Roof is also known as tegmentum. So what is the roof of middle ear? It is a thin plate of bone that is called as tegmen tympani. Tegmen tympani. It is a thin plate of bone. This tegment tympani separates the middle ear from the middle cranial fossa. Separates middle ear from middle cranial fossa. That is all about it. The roof is just a thin plate of bone. Now, posterior to the middle ear, there is another space called as the mastoid antrum. And these two are continuous with each other. There is a communication between the middle ear and the mastoid antrum. So, the roof of middle ear is continuous with the roof of the mastoid antrum also. So, tegmen tympani continuous posteriorly as tegmen antri. As tegmen antri, and it forms the roof of the mastoid antrum. This is about the roof. Next, let us study about the floor. The floor of middle ear is also known as jugular wall. It is also known as jugular wall. Now, this is also a thin plate of bone. The floor is a thin plate of bone that separates middle ear from jugular bulb. What is the jugular bulb? Internal jugular vein. So, this thin plate of bone is separating the internal jugular vein from the middle ear cavity. That is the jugular vein. Now, what is important here is sometimes this wall can be dehiscent, congenitally absent. If it is absent, what happens is the jugular vein is in direct connection with the middle ear, and so it is vulnerable to any injuries while a surgery is being performed or in any infections. The jugular vein becomes vulnerable because the bone covering it and separating it from the middle ear is dehiscent. Another important structure in the floor of middle ear is the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve, the ninth cranial nerve. It enters the middle ear near the medial wall. Through the floor, it enters the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. So, we have studied about the roof and the floor. So far, so good. Next, let us study about the anterior and the posterior walls. Anterior wall. The anterior wall is also known as carotid wall. It is also known as carotid wall. Now, please remember that the anterior wall is not complete. It is incomplete superiorly. Down there is a thin plate of bone and on top there is some communication. Let us see what all are present. There is a thin plate of bone. Why are we calling it the carotid wall? Because this plate of bone is separating the middle ear from the internal carotid artery. Separating the middle ear, ME stands for middle ear, from internal carotid artery. On top, I told you it is deficient. The wall is not continuous. So what are the structures that we have? There is the eustachian tube opening. The eustachian tube opening is present on the anterior wall. What is the eustachian tube? It connects the middle ear with the nasopharynx, also called as pharyngotympanic tube. Next, and that part of middle ear that is around this eustachian tube opening is called as protympanum. Then there is a canal for tensor tympani. Tensor tympani is a muscle that is present in the middle ear. So there is a canal for this tensor tympani muscle. Where is this canal present? It is present in the roof of the eustachian tube. Then there is another canal for cauda tympani nerve. What is cauda tympani? It is a branch of facial nerve. So in the anterior wall, there is a canal for cauda tympani nerve. The cauda tympani nerve is traveling through the anterior wall of middle ear. So these are the important points about anterior wall. This is also pretty simple. Next, let us move on to the posterior wall. The posterior wall is also known as mastoid wall. Mastoid wall. Now let us look at the structures present on the posterior wall, posterior boundary. Now please remember that the posterior boundary is also not complete. On top there is an opening, there is a communication between the middle ear and the mastoid antrum. That opening, that communication is called as editus ad antrum. Editus ad antrum. What is editus ad antrum? It is an opening through which the middle ear communicates with the mastoid antrum. Specifically speaking, the attic part of middle ear, that is the epitympanic part of middle ear, the topmost part is communicating. In between there is a wall. Only on the topmost part there is an opening between the middle ear and the mastoid antrum. Then, what are the other structures present on the posterior wall? There is a pyramid. What is this pyramid? It is a bony projection. The pyramid is a bony projection from which the stapedius muscle originates. Stapedius is a muscle in the middle ear cavity. So it takes origin from the pyramid and it inserts onto the stapes bone. Stapedius inserts onto stapes. Then we have the facial nerve running in the posterior wall, where the vertical mastoid part of facial nerve runs behind the pyramid in the posterior wall. Vertical mastoid part of the nerve. Vertical mastoid part of facial nerve runs in the posterior wall. Just behind the pyramid, the facial nerve is running. Then we have another structure called as the facial recess. Facial recess is a depression in the posterior wall lateral to the pyramid. The facial recess has some relationships. Lateral to it is the pyramid. Medial to it is the cauda tympani nerve. Say, if this is the facial recess, lateral to it is the pyramid. Medial to it is the cauda tympani nerve. And superior to it is the fossa incudis. What is fossa incudis? The short process of incus is inserted onto the fossa incudis. It is attached to fossa incudis. So these are the three relationships of the facial recess. This is the facial recess. Medially we have the pyramid, laterally we have the cauda tympani nerve, and superiorly is the fossa incudis. These are the important structures present on the posterior wall. Next, let us study about the medial wall. The medial wall is also known as labyrinthine wall. Why? Because the labyrinth or the inner ear is present medial to the middle ear. It is called labyrinthine wall. Let us study all the structures present in the labyrinthine wall. This labyrinthine wall or the medial wall of middle ear is actually the lateral wall of internal ear. I hope that's clear. We have external ear, middle ear, internal ear. The lateral wall of middle ear becomes the medial wall of external ear. So, this is the lateral wall of internal ear or labyrinth. Let us see what are the important structures present here. The first structure that we need to see is the promontory, because that is most evident. Promontory is a bulge that is formed by the basal coil of cochlea. Cochlea is a structure that twists upon itself, so it has a basal coil and some apical coils. So the bulge that is formed by the basal coil of cochlea is promontory. Then we have oval window. Oval window is also known as fenestra vestibuli. On top of the promontory is a plexus of nerves called as tympanic plexus. There is a plexus of nerves on the promontory called as tympanic plexus. Then above the promontory there is a canal for facial nerve on the medial wall. there is a canal for facial nerve above promontory. And above this canal for facial nerve is a bulge that is produced by the lateral semicircular canal or the horizontal semicircular canal. Above facial nerve canal, there is the lateral semicircular canal. In the inner ear, there are three semicircular canals in the bony labyrinth. And the lateral semicircular canal or the horizontal semicircular canal produces a bulge above the facial nerve. Then, there are two windows on the medial wall. One is the oval window, which holds the foot plate of stapes bone, and this oval window is also called as fenestra vestibuli. Fenestra vestibuli holds the foot plate of stapes. Then there is another window called as round window. This round window is also known as fenestra cochleae. The round window forms the secondary tympanic membrane. The round window is called as the secondary tympanic membrane. It encloses the scala tympani part in the inner ear. These are the two windows. Then we have a hook-like projection called as processus cochleariformis. Processus cochleariformis is a hook-like projection on the medial wall which lies anterior to the oval window. Anterior to oval window. The tendon of tensor tympani muscle takes a turn on processus cochleariformis. Before it inserts onto the neck of malleus. There is another importance of processus cochleariformis. It forms a surgical landmark for identifying the genu of facial nerve. The genu of facial nerve lies at the level of processus cochleariformis. Next, there is one more important structure called as sinus tympani. What is sinus tympani? It is a deep recess that is present on the medial wall on the posterior aspect. It can also be considered to be a part of the posterior boundary. It is at that posteromedial junction. What is it? It is a deep recess. This deep recess is medial to the pyramid. I told you on the posterior wall we have the pyramid. It lies medial to the pyramid. It is bound by two structures called as subiculum and ponticulus. Subiculum below and ponticulus above. Subiculum and ponticulus are two small bony crests that are enclosing the sinus tympani, that are present on either side of sinus tympani, above and below, and it is present medial to the pyramid. Pyramid is present on the posterior wall. These are the various structures present on the medial wall or labyrinthine wall of middle ear. Next, let us move on to the last wall and also the easiest wall, that is the lateral wall, also known as membranous wall. What is present on the lateral side of middle ear? Yes, it is the tympanic membrane. Tympanic membrane is present. Tympanic membrane is semi-transparent and hence we can see a few of the middle ear structures via the tympanic membrane. So, we know that the part of middle ear lying opposite to tympanic membrane is mesotympanum, but there is a part of middle ear above pars tense also, that is epitympanum. Now, what is the lateral wall of epitympanum? It is the bony attic wall. Bony attic wall, that is called as scutum. Scutum. So, when we are studying the lateral wall, opposite epitympanum or attic, we have the scutum. Opposite mesotympanum is the tympanic membrane, pars tensa part of tympanic membrane. With this, I complete all the 6 boundaries and walls of middle ear. Let us summarize all of them by looking at one picture. This is a representational picture depicting the middle ear. The middle ear is not exactly a cube like this. This picture facilitates easy understanding of middle ear and so it is being shown. Now please don't imagine middle ear to be a perfect cube like this. But by looking at this, you can understand all the structures properly. Now what is missing in this cube is the lateral wall. Tympanic membrane is missing. So we have removed the tympanic membrane and we are looking at middle ear. So this is the roof, also called as tegmen, and this is the floor, also called as jugular wall. Let us see what are the important points in the roof. The roof is called as tegmen tympani and it separates middle ear from middle cranial fossa. And tegmen antri is the continuation of the roof that forms the roof of mastoid antrum. That's all about tegmen. And the floor is another thin plate of bone that separates middle ear from internal jugular vein or jugular bulb. And tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve is entering the middle ear via the floor. Let us look into the picture now again. So here you can see this tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve entering into the middle ear via the floor of middle ear, via the jugular wall. This goes up and later forms the tympanic plexus. Okay, so we are done with the roof and the floor. Let us next look on to anterior and posterior walls. What are the important points in the anterior wall? Anterior wall is incomplete. There is a thin plate of bone separating the middle ear from internal carotid artery. And on top there is eustachian tube opening and there is a canal for tensor tympani in the roof of the eustachian tube. Also there is a canal for cauda tympani nerve. Cauda tympani nerve, tensor tympani and eustachian tube opening. These are the 3 important structures. Let us look at the picture now. This is the anterior wall. This is the internal carotid artery. and this here is eustachian tube. So we have the opening of eustachian tube onto the anterior wall. So the middle ear communicates with the nasopharynx via the eustachian tube. Above the eustachian tube, this is the canal for tensor tympani muscle. Tensor tympani muscle. And the fourth structure that you are seeing is this nerve over here, which is the cauda tympani nerve. That is also entering the middle ear via the anterior wall. 4 points of anterior wall covered. Eustachian tube opening, tensor tympani and cauda tympani nerve. And of course, the internal carotid artery you see outside. Then, posterior wall or the mastoid wall. The important structures that we see in the posterior wall are editus ad antrum, that is the opening. Then we see the pyramid, which is a bony projection, and facial nerve and facial recess. These are the four structures. Let us try to look at them in the diagram. So this is the opening, that is editus ad antrum. First, this is the posterior wall. And the opening that you're seeing here is editus ad antrum. It is present superiorly because the epitympanum or the attic communicates with the mastoid antrum. What else are you seeing? This structure over here is the pyramid. From the pyramid, the stapedius muscle is originating. And then we see a recess that is lateral to the pyramid. The recess is present somewhere here. It has pyramid medial to it, and laterally it has the cauda tympani nerve running, and superiorly there is the fossa incutis to the recess. This is the facial recess. And we also have the facial nerve running in the posterior wall. This is the facial nerve. It's coming from the medial wall and it is running posteriorly. These are the structures in the posterior wall. Let us look into the medial wall or the labyrinthine wall. What are the important structures here? First and most important is the promontory, the bulge. On top of promontory, we have the tympanic plexus. Then there is a canal for facial nerve, and above that there is the projection of lateral semicircular canal. And we also have the oval windows and round window, and processes cochleariformis, which is a hook-like projection. Then sinus tympani is a deep recess. Let us look into all of these structures. So this entire part, this is the medial wall. So let us label all of them. I am using a different color for distinct understanding. This oval structure that you are seeing is the oval window. It is holding the footplate of stapes. Above the oval window, this is the canal for facial nerve. And above that, this part that you are seeing is a bulge of the lateral semicircular canal. This is round window. The structures that you are not able to appreciate here are, there is a process here that is known as processus cochleariformis, at the genu of the facial nerve, at the level of the genu, where this tensor tympani muscle hooks around. Processus cochleariformis is not being seen in this picture, but it is very much present. Also, there is the sinus tympani, which is a deep recess present at the posterior-medial junction. What are the boundaries of sinus tympani? Based on that, let us try to locate where sinus tympani should have been present. It is medial to the pyramid, so it is present somewhere here. So we have sinus tympani, pyramid, and then the facial recess. So somewhere here is the sinus tympani. It's medial to the pyramid. Above it is the ponticulus and below is the subiculum. They are nothing but two bony crests. I hope with this picture and the summary, the entire middle ear boundaries are clear to all of you. In the next video, let us learn about the structures present inside the middle ear and also the mastoid antrum. Thank you very much.